When Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated on the 9th of November 1918, the streets of Paris were filled with jubilation and shouts of "Down with Wilhelm," or "Down with Guillaume," as they called him. But while the crowds were celebrating below, another Guillaume lay on his deathbed. This was the poet Guillaume Apollinaire, who had survived a shrapnel wound to his head during the war and the drilling of a hole into his skull, but who finally succumbed to Spanish flu at the age of 38. When we think about flu, most of us think along the lines of the NHS description, something that can be very unpleasant, but is usually over within about a week. 100 years on from the Spanish flu pandemic, it can be difficult to gain a sense of its devastation. But let me put things into perspective. In 2005, a team of researchers infected mice with the Spanish flu strain. They had recreated it from a human tissue sample found in the Alaskan permafrost. After 4 days, the mice had 39,000 times more flu virus in their lungs than mice who had been exposed to the common flu strain. The virus was actually so ferocious that the experiment had to be carried out in a high-security government lab. Spanish flu infected 1 in 3 people on Earth, and it killed between 50 and 100 million, 2.5% to 5% of the population. That was more than the First World War, which left 17 million dead, and possibly more than the Second World War, which left 60 million dead. It may even have killed more people than both wars combined. More terrifying still, this kind of pandemic could happen again. Studies have shown that the virulent Spanish flu strain was derived from avian flu, like the sort that decimated Asian bird populations in the 2000s and killed some people. Researchers fear that one day this kind of strain could mutate and acquire the ability to spread rapidly in people. In fact, the WHO has stated it's not a question of if there will be another pandemic, it's a matter of when. So given the seriousness of the threat, how can we protect ourselves? When Spanish flu hit in 1918, nobody understood what caused it. Virology was in its infancy, and people were searching for a vaccine, but instead targeting the bacteria that just happened to be present in the victims' bodies, not the actual cause. Nowadays, however, the WHO recommends an annual flu vaccine as the most effective way of preventing flu. For example, in the UK, the NHS routinely offers vaccines for the elderly, for young children, pregnant women, people with certain medical conditions, and healthcare workers. But achieving widespread vaccination has proved to be challenging. One reason is the low uptake due to safety concerns linked to the anti-vaccination movement. And the second reason is the challenge of making the vaccine effective and deploying it effectively. Let's look at these 2 issues in more detail. If you go online, you will see countless conspiracy theories about vaccinations. And nowadays, people tend to be more skeptical than ever of expert recommendations. So it is becoming more challenging to dispel the myths associated with vaccinations. One such myth is that vaccinating pregnant women can increase the risk of their child developing health conditions such as autism, respiratory infections, ear infections, cancer, and sensory conditions. But large-scale studies have found no link between the flu vaccine and these conditions. However, online fears may still help to explain why fewer than half of pregnant women were vaccinated against flu in England for the 2017 to 18 flu season. Pregnant women were particularly vulnerable to Spanish flu. The death rate in some hospitals among pregnant women was as high as 71%, and there were many women who suffered miscarriages or stillbirths. So it is extremely alarming that the message is not getting through. Pregnant women are exposed during the usual flu season, never mind in the event of a pandemic. Another common concern put forward by the anti-vaccination movement is that vaccines can actually cause the illnesses they are meant to protect against. In fact, research found that over half of US parents believe their children could get flu from the jab. It's true that in the past there have been examples of vaccines causing illness, such as the American Qatar incident. At that point, the process for inactivating the live polio virus failed and actually caused an estimated 40,000 cases of polio. But in part because of such scandals, vaccines are now highly regulated, and it has been argued that their safety is unmatched by any other medical product. Modern flu vaccines contain inactivated forms of the virus, or use a single gene from the virus to produce an immune response without causing infection. The challenge for health authorities, though, is how to convince people that these vaccines are safe. It is no easy task, especially given that there are questions about the vaccine's effectiveness. The flu virus is constantly mutating, so the task of identifying the different strains and developing a vaccine becomes a kind of arms race. The WHO has a network of flu centres across the world which are constantly monitoring the local flu strains, and they report back to a meeting where a decision is made regarding the appropriate recipe for the next flu season. In the Northern Hemisphere, this meeting takes place in February, so manufacturers have around 6 months to develop and roll out the vaccine before the winter flu season. But a lot can change in 6 months. Some years the vaccine is 50 to 60% effective, but in 2004 to 5, the figure was only 10%. The predictions were way off. What's more, the statistics from the UK and the US confuse the picture of the vaccine's effectiveness and how it should be deployed. The US adopts a better safe than sorry approach and recommends blanket coverage of all population groups. In contrast, the UK focuses on vulnerable groups and people who are exposed to these groups. But despite the fact that America vaccinates more people, in 2014 the death rate in America was 7 times that of the UK. The reasons for this are not clear. For most EU countries, the approach is determined by questions of cost. In a normal season, a bout of flu does not pose a serious threat to much of the population, so it's not worth vaccinating everyone. But if something more deadly were to come along, the US approach could well save thousands of lives. When a high proportion of the population is vaccinated, the community acquires what is known as herd immunity. All members of the community are protected because vaccinated people cannot transmit the disease to non-vaccinated people. This effectively stops a potential epidemic in its tracks. It can protect groups who are vulnerable to flu but can't themselves be vaccinated, such as babies or people with immune suppressing conditions such as HIV and cancer. It happens that the flu vaccine is particularly effective in children, more so than among the elderly. So it's been shown that vaccinating children can actually help to protect the elderly due to a kind of herd immunity. Japan offers a clear example of this. For over 20 years, most Japanese school children were vaccinated against flu, the rate reaching 85%. But after the program of mandatory vaccinations was discontinued in 1994, the number of elderly people dying from flu started to rise. Similarly, It is important for healthcare workers to be vaccinated to avoid passing on the flu to hospital patients who could develop serious complications. So the flu vaccine is not just about avoiding yourself a week or two in bed. It's about ensuring that you don't pass on a virus that could prove life-threatening to someone else. There will be another flu pandemic. However, this time, we have more chance of avoiding the terrible consequences of Spanish flu. The families left without breadwinners, the generation scarred by post-viral depression, babies left with fewer life chances. It is true that flu vaccines are not perfect, but we must realise that our own decisions can determine their effectiveness. And in the face of a pandemic, at the moment, vaccinations are the best chance we've got. Thank you.